Todd, it sounds to me like you and Raymond are trying to sell me helicopter parenting. When you say authentic parenting, I'm like, oh, are you justifying helicopter parenting, guys? How does this transition between authoritative parenting and helicopter parenting? Give me a little help there on that line.
But there's a clear trend of just decline in connections within community, social networks, trust, reciprocity, all those things, including within the church. So I think that really has been a big part of, as well as a breakdown of the family, right? And so that's where family and then church community for believers is where we learn how to connect, as you were alluding to, Raymond, with God, with other people with authority figures, with peers, that sort of thing.
Hello, everyone. Dennis Allen with the Disciple Dilemma, along with my co-host Raymond Monroe. Does connection matter in discipleship? Do relationships matter? Let's talk with psychologist, author, and Biola Professor Todd Hall about his new book, The Connected Life, where he's arguing if you're not connected, you're not in a relationship. If you're not in a relationship, discipleship's going to suffer. Wonderful conversation with Dr. Todd Hall. Here we go. Professor Todd Hall, we are so grateful that you, both as an author and as professor of psychology, would join us to help untangle some of the questions we have about The Connected Life, the book you wrote, and about the dilemma facing disciples today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Dennis and Raymond, and great to be on the show.
Raymond, it's terrific to have you aboard, and I think you must be hiding somewhere in an airport, right?
Yes, I am. I'm in Houston, Texas at the moment at the Admirals Club in the conference room. Yes.
Okay, well, Todd, let me kick this off and then Raymond can pick up. I have been fascinated as we've talked with Curtis Chang about his new book, The Anxiety Opportunity, as we've talked with Raymond's good friend Phil Carey about good news for anxious Christians. There's a lot of anxiousness and despair and pain out there in the university settings. And then before all that happened, we read your book, The Connected Life. What's going on out there, Professor? Untangle some of this for us, would you? And why'd you write the book?
Yeah. So thank you, Dennis. There are a lot of mental health issues going on, including anxiety, loneliness. We've been, reading quite a bit about that and experiencing that in recent years. The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, declared loneliness to be an epidemic, not too long ago. Just came out with a report on that last May. So really talking about just the epidemic of loneliness and how important community and connection are, and how important relationships and connection are for our health and well-being just generally, and including spiritually, which is a lot of what I address in the book. So yeah, and those issues, Dennis, they really go back before the pandemic. But then they were, made worse or exacerbated by the pandemic. So it's really been a challenging time for many people. So in terms of why I wrote the book, the impetus really goes back to my own story of disconnection. And I think that's kind of a mirror for this larger societal sense of disconnection that we're experiencing. So the short version of the story is that as far back as I can remember, my mom struggled with pretty significant mental health issues, and my parents split up when I was about 9 years old. So all of that led to a lot of disconnection in my own life, within my family, with friends, within myself. And so then fast forward to college, and there was a significant period of time where I felt very distant from God. So a lot of disconnection from God. And I experienced a split between what I knew about God and what how I experienced God. And I later realized that all this pain and disconnection in my relationship with God was linked back to these formative childhood experiences, in my life with my family. So I tell that story because I think it is, as I mentioned, a reflection of our collective story of relational and spiritual disconnection and search for meaning in a fragmented, lonely, as we were just talking about, post-COVID world. And so this is something I'm seeing in my networks with students, clients, here at the university setting. You mentioned, Dennis, I'm sure you are seeing it as well. So we really are living in the midst of a connection crisis. So that's really how I start off the book, to sort of frame the context, is that we are living in the midst of a connection crisis, and it impacts us socially, relationally, but really our entire well-being, including our spiritual well-being and relationship with God. So in a nutshell, I think my entire life in a way has been kind of a journey from disconnection early on to learning how to connect more deeply and more of a loving way with God, with others, and then helping others on this journey as a therapist and coach. So that's really what the book is about, my attempt to kind of share what I've learned so far on this journey.
I'm really interested, Todd, in the connectedness stuff. And when I look at my children and then my grandchildren, one of the things I've seen is that instead of seeing life as a collection of communities that I belong to in relationship, it's a series of institutions with rules and hierarchy and that sort of thing. And that's even in the church. Most of the time, the church, you've got a staff, and then you've got people who attend. And so I'm a member, but I'm not necessarily becoming a disciple. So how would you characterize, and especially young people, I find they're not only hungry for relationships, they may never have had very many deep relationships. They really don't know, in one sense, what they're missing and what they're lacking. So how has institutionalization, including the church, really affected our ability to be connected?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, Raymond. And I think so, one of the things we've seen going back before COVID is this decline in what Robert Putnam called Putnam social capital, right? Which is basically the networks of trust in relationships that we have. And so he documents that in his book, Bowling Alone. And then he's done some updated work. That book was back in the early 2000s. But there's a clear trend of just decline in connections within community, social networks, trust, reciprocity, all those things, including within the church. So I think that really has been a big part of, as well as a breakdown of the family, right? And so that's where family and then church community for believers is where we learn how to connect, as you were alluding to, Raymond, with God, with other people with authority figures, with peers, that sort of thing. So I think that really has impacted our sense of connection and attachment that has become more insecure rather than secure. And so this is being, talked about more and addressed now in, thankfully among believers, also social scientists. So there was a group a while back that wrote a report called Hardwired to Connect, and they were addressing this exact issue that we are seeing a decline in the health of our children, and so they attribute that to the breakdown in connection, and they argue from a social science perspective. So only a few of the people on this committee were believers, but they attribute that to the fact that we are, as they put it, hardwired to connect, that we're built for a relationship, and that has been breaking down, and it's leading to more disorders and struggles and challenges among our children. And so their prescription, if you will, is what they call authoritative community. So that's what they are propagating and saying, that's what we need to help children, to help our society. We need authoritative communities. And they draw that concept from the literature on authoritative parenting, which basically, it also ties in with attachment. It basically is a melding or integration of warmth and structure, would be one way to put it, right? So there's structure, meaning there's moral boundaries, but there's also warmth and connection, and an intergenerational aspect to that. And so that's really what's broken down.
How did we move from this sort of warm family, church, community to institutions where we have an authoritative structure that's really formal, and yet we've begun to lack really the community sense, the fact that we're part of one another?
I think, Raymond, that circles back to the breakdown of the family and secure attachment. And there's a lot of reasons for that Putnam goes into in his book. There's just, there's electronic entertainment, now social media and the digital revolution, all of that. There's, just in the last 50, 60 years, people moving much more, that's another factor. Increase in the rise in divorce, which started around the 1970s. So a number of psychologists have written about that, so there's a number of, quite a few factors that play into that, and has just led to less of a sense of, kids growing up with a secure attachment and having that structure. And I wanted to comment too on your great point there, Raymond, that, one interesting thing that these social scientists talk about is that we internalize values. So back to this idea of moral structure through our attachment figures, right? So that's how people learn to connect in a secure way and also learn their internalized moral compass or values, right? So if I see you, mom or dad, pastor, leaders in the church, grandfather, right, who has certain values, because I'm attached to you, I want to please you and I'm going to take on your values, right? And when I violate those values, I'm going to experience a disconnect with you, right? Because that's going to be communicated somehow. So that's how those values are transferred. And so that's part of what's broken down as well.
Todd, it sounds to me like you and Raymond are trying to sell me helicopter parenting. When you say authentic parenting, I'm like, oh, are you justifying helicopter parenting, guys? How does this transition between authoritative parenting and helicopter parenting? Give me a little help there on that line.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question, Dennis. Yeah. Yeah, I think, helicopter parenting, snowplow parenting, right? There's lots of terms for this. So yeah, parents sort of like plowing the way so kids don't have to experience any difficulties. Again, there's lots of cultural reasons that have, kind of played into that. School's a lot more difficult, and these mental health issues, a lot of anxiety. We're seeing that at the college level here, that happening. And some of that, I think, is when, comes out of the parents' anxiety. Some of it is, just concern about cultural aspects and that kind of thing. But so I think it's authoritative parenting and community is not pushing the idea of never allowing your children to experience challenges or difficulties. That's not actually healthy for them. Jonathan Haidt has written about this eloquently in The Coddling of the American Mind and talked about these kinds of issues that, yeah, we have to face challenges. And this gets back to a key point in attachment theory is that kids need a balance of what I call comfort and challenge. The simple way to remember it. The technical terms in the attachment literature are secure base and haven of safety. But you can think of those as comfort and then a positive sense of challenge, right? So when they're distressed, they need to be able to go to their attachment figures, to mom, dad, it could be a coach, there can be other attachment figures, grandpa, and when they're distressed and receive comfort, right? But they also need an appropriate and positive sense of challenge to try new things, to explore, that kind of thing. So there needs to be that balance. So yeah, it's not pushing the idea of, don't let your children experience any difficulties. And so I think part of that is to be aware of that. And also for, as parents, we need to be aware of our own anxiety. Is that part of what's driving my parenting? And we need to be regulating and managing our own emotions and anxiety and not letting that dictate, our relationships in general, as well as how we parent.
Well, now you're a professor at a Christian school, so you're not seeing any of this kind of stuff backwashing into your operations, right? It's harmony, peace, and love there. But what's it really like as students in kind of the undergraduate and graduate world that you're working in?
Yeah, no, there's definitely an increase in mental health issues. I mean, across the board at all universities, including Christian universities. And I've seen that just personally, in my context here at Biola, just looking at our counseling centers at universities across the country. Just from my personal experience, this is my 26th year here. I came from the Army. So I was active duty practicing in the Army. So saw, as you can imagine, everything under the sun. And then I came here and started practicing in the counseling center. And it was, saw some people from the community, but also some students, and then supervised graduate students in our program here at Rosemead who were seeing undergraduate students. And it was more mild than what I saw in the Army. There were a few more significant, severe kind of pathology cases, but, more mild kinds of, mild depression, anxiety, things like that. Now it's just the ubiquity of it. Just so many more students have these issues that many of our counseling centers have a waiting list pretty quickly. We don't have enough, we're working hard to have enough staff to treat them. And then there's a lot more severe issues. The severity is a lot stronger. So in many of our counseling centers, including the Christian schools, we're dealing with everything, lots of trauma and abuse anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. So it is definitely a significant challenge. And I think part of the cause is what we were talking about earlier. It's just all of these factors, the breakdown of the family and relationships, and then the rise of, just the digital age, that's having an impact as well.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.